The sun was barely peeking through Sarah's blinds when her alarm blared at 6:30 am. As she reached over to silence it, a familiar heaviness settled in her chest. Another day, another battle, she thought, staring at the ceiling. Her job presentation was just hours away, and the voice in her head had already begun its morning assault. "You're going to mess this up like you always do. Everyone will see how incapable you really are." Sarah had been struggling with these intrusive thoughts for years. What started as occasional self-doubt had evolved into a constant internal critic that colored everything in her life with shades of inadequacy and fear. Her friends saw a capable, intelligent woman, but Sarah could only see her flaws, magnified 1,000 times by the unforgiving lens of her negative thinking. This morning was particularly difficult. As she showered and dressed, each action felt mechanical, overshadowed by the mounting dread. "They'll all be judging you," the voice whispered. "Remember how you stumbled over your words last time. That's who you really are." This is a story that might sound familiar to many of us. Negative thoughts don't discriminate. They affect people from all walks of life, regardless of success, intelligence, or circumstance. But what exactly are these thoughts, and why do they hold such power over us? Negative thoughts are automatic patterns of thinking that distort our perception of reality. They're like wearing glasses with the wrong prescription. Everything appears warped and threatening. These thoughts aren't random. They follow specific patterns that psychologists call cognitive distortions. They include catastrophizing, assuming the worst possible outcome, black and white thinking, seeing situations as all good or all bad with no middle ground, personalization, blaming yourself for everything, and many others. Research from the field of cognitive psychology, pioneered by Dr. Aaron Beck in the 1960s, has shown that these distorted thought patterns directly influence our emotions and behaviors. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders found that negative thinking patterns were strongly correlated with increased anxiety and depression symptoms. The more frequently someone engaged in these thought patterns, the more severe their symptoms became. For Sarah, catastrophizing and mind-reading, assuming she knew what others were thinking about her, were her primary distortions. Each negative prediction felt utterly real and inevitable, despite having little evidence to support these beliefs. The morning of her presentation, Sarah was about to surrender to these thoughts when she remembered the techniques her therapist had taught her. Taking a deep breath, she paused and decided to try something different. What if, she thought to herself, I challenge these thoughts instead of accepting them as truth? This simple question marked the beginning of Sarah's journey toward recognizing and challenging her negative thoughts. It's a skill that anyone can learn, and one that can transform your relationship with your own mind. As the ancient Roman philosopher Epictetus wisely observed, we are disturbed not by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens. This profound insight from nearly 2,000 years ago aligns perfectly with modern cognitive behavioral therapy approaches, highlighting that our suffering often stems not from events themselves, but from how we interpret them. Sarah began by first recognizing her negative thoughts for what they were, not objective truths, but habitual patterns of thinking. She took out her journal and wrote down exactly what her inner critic was saying. I'm going to mess up this presentation. Everyone will judge me. If I make one mistake, it proves I'm incompetent. Looking at these thoughts on paper immediately created some distance. They seemed less overwhelming when pulled from the swirling vortex of her mind and placed under the clear light of conscious examination. Next came the challenging part. Sarah asked herself a series of questions about each thought. What evidence do I have that this thought is true? Is there any evidence that contradicts this thought? How would I respond if a friend shared this same worry with me? What's a more balanced way to look at this situation? For the first thought, I am going to mess up this presentation. Sarah realized she had successfully delivered dozens of presentations in the past. Yes, She had made minor mistakes in some, but none had been the catastrophe her mind predicted. The evidence actually pointed toward competence, not failure. For the second thought, everyone will judge me. She recalled how supportive her colleagues had been in the past. When others had made small errors during presentations, she hadn't judged them harshly. Why would they treat her differently? Through this process, Sarah wasn't dismissing her concerns entirely. Instead, she was examining them critically and developing more balanced alternatives. I've prepared thoroughly for this presentation. I might make small mistakes, as everyone does, but I have the knowledge and skills to deliver valuable information to my team. A 2018 study from Oxford University found that this type of cognitive restructuring, the formal name for challenging negative thoughts, significantly reduced anxiety symptoms when practiced regularly. The researchers discovered that the brain can actually be retrained over time, creating new neural pathways that support more balanced thinking. As Sarah walked into the conference room later that day, the negative thoughts hadn't disappeared completely. Challenging thoughts is a process, not an instant cure, but they had diminished in volume and credibility. When her mind whispered, "You'll fail," she could now respond, "That's just a thought, not a fact." The evidence suggests otherwise. During her presentation, Tara did stumble over a few words. In the past, this would have sent her into a spiral of shame and self-criticism. But today, she paused, smiled, and continued. She noticed that no one seemed bothered by her small mistake. In fact, her colleagues were engaged and appreciative of her work. The psychologist Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." Sarah was learning to inhabit that space, to pause between a triggering event and her automatic negative thought, creating room for a more deliberate and compassionate response. For those looking to master the art of challenging negative thoughts like Sarah did, here's a step-by-step approach. First, become aware of your negative thoughts. This might sound simple, but many of us have lived with critical inner voices for so long that we don't even notice them anymore. They operate in the background like ambient noise. Start by simply noticing when you feel a sudden shift in your mood, anxiety, sadness, anger, shame. These emotions are often triggered by thoughts. Ask yourself, what was I thinking just before I started feeling this way? A 2021 research review published in Frontiers in Psychology found that mindfulness practices significantly enhance our ability to notice negative thought patterns. Even 5 minutes of daily mindfulness meditation can increase awareness of automatic thoughts. Once you've identified a negative thought, write it down. There's something powerful about seeing your thoughts on paper. They become objects you can examine rather than truths you must accept. Research from UCLA found that the simple act of labeling negative emotions reduced their intensity in the brain. Next, identify which cognitive distortion might be at play. Is it catastrophizing, imagining the worst possible outcome? Black and white thinking, seeing things as all good or all bad? Personalizing, assuming everything is your fault? Overgeneralizing, applying one negative experience to all situations? Mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking? Emotional reasoning, believing something is true because it feels true? Understanding the particular flavor of your negative thinking makes it easier to challenge. It's like identifying the specific bug in a piece of software. Once you know what's causing the problem, you can fix it more efficiently. Now comes the heart of the practice, challenging the thought with evidence and alternative perspectives. Ask yourself, what facts support this thought? What facts contradict it? Am I confusing a thought with a fact? Am I focusing on the negative and filtering out the positive? How would I view this situation if it were happening to someone else? What would I say to a friend who had this thought? A groundbreaking 2022 study in the Journal of Cognitive Therapy and Research found that people who regularly practiced challenging negative thoughts experienced a 65% reduction in anxiety symptoms over 6 months. The study also revealed that this skill gets easier with practice. What initially feels difficult becomes more automatic over time. Sarah found it helpful to keep a thought record for several weeks, documenting her negative thoughts and her challenges to them. This created a personal evidence bank she could refer to when similar thoughts arose in the future. She could remind herself, "I've had this thought before, and here's what I learned when I examined it." Over time, Sarah noticed something remarkable. She was catching her negative thoughts earlier, often before they triggered intense emotional reactions. She was developing what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe her thoughts rather than being completely identified with them. As the Buddhist saying goes, "You are the sky. The thoughts are just clouds passing by." This doesn't mean Sarah never experienced negative thoughts again. Challenging thoughts isn't about eliminating them entirely. That's not a realistic goal. Our brains are designed to scan for threats, and negative thoughts are one manifestation of this survival mechanism. The goal isn't to never have a negative thought. It's to recognize negative thoughts when they appear and to respond to them skillfully rather than being ruled by them. 6 months after beginning this practice, Sarah found herself preparing for another important presentation. The familiar whispers of doubt emerged, but now they felt more like background noise than commanding voices. She acknowledged them. Hello again, fear of judgment, and continued with her preparations. A 2020 longitudinal study, published in Behavior Research and Therapy, followed participants who learned to challenge negative thoughts over a 2-year period. The researchers found that this skill had a cumulative effect. The longer someone practiced it, the more resilient they became to stress and negative emotions. Participants reported feeling more in control of their reactions and less at the mercy of their automatic thoughts. As the philosopher and psychologist William James noted over a century ago, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind." Modern neuroscience confirms this insight, demonstrating that challenging negative thoughts actually creates new neural pathways in the brain. With practice, these pathways become stronger, making balanced thinking more natural and automatic. Sarah's story illustrates an important truth. Challenging negative thoughts isn't just about feeling better in the moment. It's about reclaiming your agency and living more fully. When we're entangled in negative thinking, we make decisions based on fear rather than possibility. We avoid risks, turn down opportunities, and limit ourselves in countless ways. Learning to challenge these thoughts opens up new horizons. The writer Anaz Nin captured this beautifully when she wrote, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." Our thoughts create the lens through which we experience the world. By learning to challenge negative thoughts, we're not just changing our thinking, we're changing our entire lived experience. For anyone struggling with persistent negative thoughts, remember that this is a skill that improves with practice. Don't be discouraged if your challenges don't immediately silence your inner critic. Each time you question a negative thought, you're weakening its hold on you, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Research from the field of neuroplasticity shows that consistency matters more than perfection. A small daily practice of challenging thoughts creates more lasting change than occasional perfect execution. Start with just 1 or 2 thoughts a day and build from there. Sarah still experiences negative thoughts, especially during stressful periods. But they no longer define her reality or dictate her choices. She has learned to see them as weather patterns passing through the sky of her mind, sometimes stormy, sometimes mild, but never the entirety of who she is. As you embark on your own journey of challenging negative thoughts, remember that you're not alone. This is a universal human struggle, and the skills to address it are learnable. With patience and practice, you too can recognize and challenge negative thoughts like a pro, creating space for a more balanced, compassionate relationship with your own mind.